welcome to the Awkward Conversations podcast. Today's episode is Doug Beattie, and this was an incredible episode. I actually can't believe some of the stuff he revealed, talking about his lived experiences in conflict and talking about just his positivity for life. Like he's a phenomenal human being. I could listen to the guy all day. What do you think, Kieran?
Yeah, it was fascinating, and we knew all about his past and his experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, but the stories that he was recalling with us in our conversation, was unbelievably vivid. It's to the points he even described him himself as gory, but it really gave us a vivid picture of what he experienced there and what happens, and it was really, really fascinating.
So an incredible episode this week. Give it a listen.
I'm here.
Hello, Doug. How you doing?
Apologies for being late, but I forgot.
That's all right. I was just saying to Damien, Doug could either be a Rangers fan, a Man United fan, or a Chelsea fan, either of which means he's probably like, no, I'm watching the watching the match.
That would be a good excuse, and I could use that as an excuse, but I'm afraid my excuse is I literally forgot. And Kate, who you've been engaging with, sent me a message says, "Don't forget." So
What is your football team,
for being a bit late.
What is your football team?
Well, God forbid, I'm a Manchester United supporter.
Same.
But I'm more rugby than I am football, if I'm really honest with you.
Uh-huh.
So. But I'm still working, so you've got me on the phone. So apologies for any of the quality that you might get here. I hope you can hear me okay.
No, that's grand.
Yeah, crystal clear. Yeah, very clear. Actually, the camera's better than our cameras, I think.
You keep well, lads. Yeah.
Yeah,
not
good.
Not bad. Well, once we're finished, I'll be putting the United Chelsea game on, even though the whole season's basically done and dusted for us.
It's a disaster, man. It's an absolute disaster.
It's probably the worst. It's worse than my season. I was trying to think when it's been as bad, but it really hasn't been as bad.
No, it hasn't, and it's not as if he hasn't got the players. The players are there, just no team cohesion. Just really poor.
Well, I'm hoping that the new guy Ten Hag actually really does just go to town and like show 9 or 10 the door.
Here's hoping.
Damien, this is all over your head because you don't like sports, because you're a weirdo.
David, do you not like sport at all?
Do you know what? I like boxing, and I would like UFC. So not like typical team sports. Like
right. Okay.
You didn't watch the boxing last weekend?
I like that too, but I do like rugby. I do like that cohesion you see within sport. Sporting teams. I like that. But it's good to see. But here, sure, I have no time for that.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the Awkward Conversations podcast. Kieran and I like to joke that the only awkward thing about the conversations is us. So we'll not be. Don't worry, it'll not be like the Nolan show. So we'll not ask you too many difficult questions.
Please, I've done so many. I've done so many now. I'm actually in autopilot when I'm answering questions, so I have to try and answer questions in a different manner now. So. I'll do my best for you, chaps.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I think every day this week I've messaged him and saying, "Jesus, Nolan's giving him a wild hard time." And even the Green Party, I thought if he's going to give anyone an easy ride, it's going to be the Green Party. They're going to muster maximum 2 or 3 seats. So what's he going to go to town on? They've never had a ministerial role. They've barely had a seat, and yet again, Jesus, the man was ripping them to pieces. Like, and I was thinking, Christ, is there any need for this? And he's like that with everybody, obviously.
Did you listen to the SDLP today? Well, I have to say, I thought he was doing fantastic, and he was covering his ground quite well to a certain degree, within the confines of what he was doing. And his big trip up was school uniforms, and it destroyed him. The school uniforms absolutely destroyed it. He flattened his face, and I felt sorry for Matthew, because things like that just can trip you up. And I think that threw him completely.
But I almost feel like Nolan's not happy with an interview unless he gets a good scrap in there. Like, about anything. Like,
Well, I always say to him, if I can get away from Nolan with a score draw, I'm happy enough.
Yeah, like maybe we need to learn something from him, because we just like to have friendly conversations, because that's the kind of conversations we like. But Nolan,
you're not shouty enough, Demo.
yeah.
Turn the volume up on that thing.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. First thing is just to ask, how are you doing? How are you feeling at the minute? And yeah, are you exhausted? Do you recognize what your family look like after?
Can I just say to you, I'm invigorated, if that's a strange thing, a word to use, but I'm invigorated because I think the battle is a good battle for this election. I think it's, the outcome of it is really, really important. So I'm invigorated to try and see if we can really get people to motivate, to make change, and to really move Northern Ireland in a different direction. So I'm invigorated for that. But I have to say, I'm being honest as well, I'm physically tired, and mentally it's hard, because I've got questions and information spinning around my head, and sometimes you just lose a word within the whole melee of stuff in your head, and then when you answer a question, that one word is the link to everything else, and it just all falls apart. So it's not easy. It's hard graft, but this is what it's all about. This is why we're in politics. We need to make sure people hear our message, understand our message, make it as simple as it can and as complex as it needs to be, and be able to deliver at pace. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's hard work, but I'm invigorated as well. And another thing that invigorates me is the people around me. I've got 27 candidates. Well, I'm 27th, so 26 candidates plus me, and I think they're exceptional people. I've never felt as much enthused by the candidates around me as I have felt during this election campaign. But not just the candidates. I think all of those people who are supporting us as well, who are helping to canvass, and activists. I think they've really added a different flavour, I think, to the Ulster Unionist Party during this election.
You definitely need a full squad. I think I remember reading about the Liberal Democrats in England in 2015, where they had a massive squad. Obviously, a younger demographic, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, out campaigning like mad in 2010, and obviously they did very well. And then when they blew it with their coalition, they basically couldn't find anyone to go out and knock doors in 2015, and then they completely collapsed through the floor. So obviously, it must be that you obviously need a massive team in order to get anywhere.
Well, I've got to say, it's not just a massive team. Sometimes even a small team, if it's the right team, can have a massive impact. And as any party, we all know you need to try and look like the people who you want to vote for you. And that's the electorate in Northern Ireland, who are young, who are middle aged, who are older. And we need to have the people out who look like them, to get them to understand the very problems that we reach at the front door. And the Ulster Unionist Party, I think, have had a real problem attracting either young people or females, but that's changed, I have to say, over the last 12 months. We are attracting far more younger people, far more females who are coming and joining us, and that adds a different flavour. So when I'm out canvassing and it's just me and three females who are knocking doors, and they're young females, and they've got life experience, it's a small group of people, but they have a real impact on the people they're talking to when they knock the doors.
Do you think that maybe a few years ago the Ulster Unionists would have almost been ubiquitous with the old Tory party, pre-Cameron, all in their 50s, all old men who've been just hanging about the place for ages,
well, hang on,
Kieran,
Kieran, now you're saying 50s and then saying old men now.
But everyone, I mean, the shape of the Tory party back then was like, it's the party for older white guys who've just kind of been about the same block, part of that establishment. And then kind of, if you looked at the Ulster Unionists back then, they weren't so different, like, I suppose even kind of the 98, the 05 period, it was kind of those old faces, David Trumbull, Ray Jempy, those characters. Not saying anything about them, but that's just the kind of look, the image of them, So I suppose you're trying to basically do what the Tory party tried to do, and kind of make that generational shift.
Yeah, Kieran, you make you make a really good point. I'm not saying I totally agree with the way you're making it, but your point is a valid point. The Ulster Unionist Party may have been stuck a little bit in a bit of a malaise over a period of time, but the likes of David Trimble and Reg Empey really brought something positive to Northern Ireland. If you look at the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, if it wasn't for men like them, we would never have had this. So they've had an awful lot to offer. But the point that you're making, and where I agree with you, is we have to move forward from where we were then to where we are now. And that's why I said earlier on, we have to look like the people we want to vote for us. And that means having a more diverse group of people within the party. And that's what I've been trying to do since I became the leader for the last year. And I was open in saying I want to attract more females into the Ulster Unionist Party. And therefore, it needs to understand the issues that they face and be more friendly towards them. And the same for young people, and invite them in. And, young people will join the party if it's more confident, positive, optimistic, and less angry and negative. And I think unionism has had that tag of being angry and negative and pessimistic. And nobody wakes up in the morning, wanting to hear pessimism. They want to wake up in the morning wanting to hear optimism. So we're trying to change that to attract people. But we don't discard those who went before us or those who are with us now. We still have a strong conservative element to the Ulster Unionist Party, and they make up who we are as well, and we can't discard them, and I won't discard them either. But we do need to make sure we've got the right mix, and that's going to take. That's going to take a while. I mean, the Ulster Unionist Party it's a super tanker. It's got a big turning circle, but we have to start that turn.
Well, you've done a wee bit better than the DUP, who had only one woman in a prominent role, and then they managed to give her a group beating last year. And
well,
kind
that
of
was
imploding on themselves.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty awful. I've got to say, last year for Arlene, and I would disagree with a lot of some of the things Arlene Foster did. I've got to say, but there was a degree of gravitas around her where she was able to, even if not always go in the direction I thought she needed to go, she was always able to go a particular direction and do it in a sensible manner. So I think what happened to her was a real eye opener. It's a real awakening, I think, for many people that they would do that and be so brutal in the manner in which they did it. And although Arlene is no Margaret Thatcher, but it reminds me of the way that drip feeding of anti-Thatcherism, for example, infested the Conservative Party to finally push her out the door.
Aye, the DUP's got a few Heseltines in the ranks.
There was a few Heseltines in the ranks, and we just didn't have them swinging the mace around their heads, which would have been quite interesting.
I'm sure Arlene Foster would be calling them a few bastards as well.
Well, I'm sure there's a few choice words that I would, as you know, dare repeat them because I never swear, and I'm sure people realise this. Of course I do, but I try not to. But I'm sure there's a few choice words being used.
I'm not sure if we can use that demo. I was just quoting John Major, 95.
Yeah, like I always think Arlene was quite misunderstood because I think sometimes she can come across as not sectarian, but like would hold quite strong views about nationalists and stuff. And I think she was kind of a bit misunderstood because her upbringing, like it wasn't her dad shot in the head. Am I right in saying there was her dad shot?
I think they attempted to kill her father. I'm not sure if he was shot or not. I don't know. Is the answer? But just I mean, Damien, you're right in what you say there. And some of the things she did, I think, are easily forgotten about. I remember people remember her attending that GAA match.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Christopher Salford, and God rest his soul, attended with her as well, and she got an awful lot of hard time for that. But it was a very brave move for her to do that.
Well, she got a great reception. She got a great reception at the match. She got "Come on, Arlene" signed her the whole game, from what I recall. I mean, that was received very well. The fact that her and
even her attendance in Mark McGuinness's funeral and everything, I thought was a big. I thought that was a definite hand of friendship.
Yeah, and I guess people forget about moments like that because they're overtaken by other moments and more negative moments, I suppose, that maybe did for her in the end. That the crocodile comment was just one of those really bad off the cuff comments. And look, I'm I'm one of those people who fire from the hip also, and say things which I shouldn't have said, and I know that too, and my humor can be a little bit dark at times, but I think sometimes you forget about all the positives and you just focus on some of the negatives, and therefore I think people focus on the negative sides of what Arlene did, and maybe forgot about some of the positive things he did. But of course, I say this all caveated in a position of, look, I was no fan of Arlene's or the DUP at any stage. So I say that just from a looker in, as opposed to somebody who supported.
And look, you've been very frank in the past about your experiences. You've been to Bosnia and Kosovo and Afghanistan. Like, just on a purely like a genuinely interesting level, because when I play sports I get scared, when I do public speaking I get scared, but I think there's a different level of scared when you're literally fighting for your life. Is it what are you able to articulate, like, what you experience in those moments, or are you able to?
It's really difficult to a certain degree, Damien. I'll tell you why it's difficult, because I'm sitting here in a warm office. I'm under no threat whatsoever, and therefore sometimes it's hard to throw yourself back. But I'll try and explain it in the best way that I can. Is that fear comes in very different ways. First of all, the expectation of what's going to happen is probably the most scariest thing. So before you go out on patrol, or before you go heading towards combat, before a single shot is fired, it can be uncontrollable. It can lead me to vomit, and I've vomited before. So fearful going out on patrol. Nothing's happened. There's no fighting. There's no bullets being fired. I just know the enemy's in the area, and I'm vomiting before I go out. And then when I'm out patrolling, I start to get the signs that something's going to happen, and I can feel that real pit and knot in your stomach, and you just know that it's going, and you don't know what form it's going to take. You just know something's about to happen. And then the bullets start going, and the rockets start exploding, and you're in the middle of war, and that's when the business of war starts. And if you understand what I mean by the business of war, it's when all of the training that you've been taught kicks in, and the fear's gone, the nervousness has gone. There's an adrenaline that has taken over, which is guiding your every motion, and you're fighting for your life, but there's no fear in doing that, because you're supremely confident in who you are, your equipment, and the people around you. But some of the fighting I got into was hand-to-hand fighting, so this was up close and personal. This was eye to eye, eyeball to eyeball, hands on necks, bayonets and rifle butts, and pushing and shoving and kicking and biting and screaming and grenades, very, very close. And when you're doing that, it's like being in the worst fight at a rugby match or a football match, or in the pub that you've ever been in, because you're fighting to live, and you'll do anything to live, and there's no room for fear. There's no room for fear, because there's two things. One is, if you're successful, you will have banished the fear and killed the enemy. But if you're not successful, you'll be dead. So it's gone. So, but that is the way it is. But once the fighting's done, and you stop fighting and you go into that period of quietness again, that sickness appears again. That pit in your stomach comes back again. You start reflecting on what you just did, and you start to feel fearful again about everything that you just went through. And if you're picking up your own soldiers, or if you're picking up enemy dead, you see the aftermath of what you did. And I think that's when fear really takes over, because you suddenly realize that could be you the next time. The next time that person being picked up and put into a body bag can be you. So you try and banish that thoughts away, and the next day it starts all over again, and it starts with vomiting. It starts with the pit in the stomach again, and then war starts again, and the business of war starts again. It's an incredible feeling, and I'm not even sure I've done it huge justice, other than give you how the emotional waves work.
No, that's a pretty vivid way that you've put it.
Yeah.
Now,
but there's another part to it, Kieran, if I can, without overplaying my hand on this one. But at the end of it all, there's a guilt as well. There's a guilt that you're still alive and the enemy is dead. There's a guilt that your colleague, your friend, has been wounded or is dead, and you're still alive. So with all of this, at the end of it, there's still a feeling of guilt. And I say to people often, that when I'm walking about in Tesco's, I can never imagine myself fighting a battle in Afghanistan. But when I'm fighting a battle in Afghanistan, I can never imagine myself walking through Tesco's. They are just two different lives, but each one carries its own burden.
Yeah. Geez, very interesting. Really interesting. I mean, we're not going to hear stories like that from any of our guests that we're speaking to before the election anyway. I think the worst stories we've got is door knocking and Bangor. Um, but
I have a few of those as well, by the way.
the feeling sick and nauseous, the adrenaline kicking in. But
well,
I was speaking to
it's feeling nauseous when that young woman or that elderly lady comes running out to hand you your leaflet back. There's that nauseous feeling. You sometimes get that as you try to get away, but it happens. Look, you know.
Well, I was speaking to Damien earlier, and we were looking forward to speaking to you, and I wanted to ask you about it, but Damien wasn't so sure. But the question I had was, you know, retrospectively, you know, in 2022, when you look at some of the campaigns you were involved in, um, you know, do you feel a bit angry at political leaders who were in charge at the time, for example, in Afghanistan and Iraq, who, you know, you know, possibly some would say kind of betrayed people who served there by what has happened before, during, and after? For example, in Afghanistan, the Taliban are in control of the full country. In Iraq, there was no WMDs found. But in spite of all that happened, people like yourself went there in probably good faith that they were completing a mission, but on a different premise than what you believed. You know, is there some feeling of anger or betrayal or resentment, or you know, a feeling that you were lied to, or a bit of dishonesty, or anything like that?
Yeah, there is, Kieran, and it's really interesting because those feelings are for politicians, and it's directed at governments. It's not directed at military leaders or anybody else, because they all did what they were asked to go and do. That's what military does. We work to the government of the day, and without grace or favor, and we do what we do. But there's an anger directed towards the politicians, because the politicians need to do more and be better at this. You know, and when I say politicians, and I don't mean all politicians, but governments as well. When governments send people to war, they need to understand why they're sending them to war. They need to make sure their information is correct. You know, the war in Iraq, which was based around weapons of mass destruction, there was none. We were lied to. The government got it wrong. They need to own up to getting it wrong and sending people to Iraq to fight. I did my duty because we believed. When we crossed the border into Iraq from Kuwait, we crossed the border believing that at any minute we could come under a chemical attack or weapons of mass destruction. We believed that, and that's what we were doing. And it wasn't until well into the conflict that we suddenly realized that actually there was nothing there. So my anger is at politicians and governments for sending people to war without the right information and understanding what they're sending us there to do. When I went to Afghanistan, I did 3 tours in Afghanistan, and each tour in Afghanistan, I was told I was going there for a different reason, and it didn't make sense when on reflection now. But I went and I did my duty because I believed in them. But the other thing that annoys me about some politicians, and I am a politician now as well, is this jingoistic hype. When they stand there and they wave the flag and they scream, "Rule Britannia," and "Let's send our soldiers to war. We've got the best army in the world. Let's get them out there." You know, these are the people who send us to war without a concept of what they're doing, and they need to join us. They need to come and see the aftermath of what they're doing. It's not jingoistic. It's not something that we should be screaming from the rooftops and say, "Isn't this wonderful? We're sending our soldiers to war." It's something that should be taken as a somber reality. That's something that we have to do. And so therefore some politicians, not all, but some politicians annoy me in that jingoistic fervor in the way they do things. They need to understand the consequences of sending soldiers like me, and young men as well, and young women to a conflict, and understand when they send them there, they have to send them for the right reasons, with an aim, a plan, a mission, but also how to get out again. Afghanistan has left me completely deflated, because I seen so much, I did so much. A lot of that fighting that I'm talking about was in Afghanistan, where I had to take lives. And I look at it and I say, what on earth was that all for? Young girls who were never allowed to be educated were educated, and you can't take that away from them. But that's stopped now, where women are not being educated again. We've gone backwards. I think when we left Afghanistan, we left with our tail between our legs, and I'm still disgruntled to this day about it.
Well, you must have been aghast last August watching the scenes at Kabul airport of people trying to cling on to airplanes.
Well, it was worse than that, Kieran. I'll tell you why it was worse than that, because that's Kabul, and of course all the media was in Kabul, and it's easy to film them things in Kabul. But I spent most of my time in Helmand, in the countryside, in the Calais, the villages, in the districts, in the green zone, getting to meet people, working with Afghan security forces, working with Afghan police, working with the local population, the imams and the village elders, all of these people who supported us. And I know for a fact, when we were watching those scenes in Kabul, those people we were working with in Helmand, in the Upper Gresh Valley, in Sangin, up in Kijaki, in Nowzad, in Nadali, in Lashkar, or further south from that, those people were being killed as we were watching this happen. They were being slaughtered by the Taliban, and I was getting emails from desperate people who I'd got to know over there, asking for me to help them get out.
Jeez.
And I couldn't get them out. So I still look at that. I still look at the pictures of those people who I served alongside, and I just think we've abandoned those people. And if they're still alive now, they're under the most tyrannical rule that you can imagine. Because if it's bad in Kabul, it's 10 times worse in the countryside.
You were in Helmand, and Helmand is generally used as a euphemism for, for hell on earth. That kind of the chaos of the fighting in Helmand is fairly notorious as being, dramatic to say the least, or intense. And in particular, obviously, read the recent article that Joe Brawley and yourself, when you'd met up and he had talked about your experience there. I suppose this two-part question is really, if it weren't documented, you wouldn't believe that it happened, because it's such an extraordinary story where you were supposed to be rescued after a day, or supposed to have backup after a day, and it was close to 2 weeks before you had backup, and there was the guts of 2,000 of them, and there was only I'm brain's bad with the numbers, but is it 100 or 200 of yourselves, and you had to kind of hold them off, and obviously it resulted in you having to take lives, and it was hand-to-hand combat and everything. I guess, do you have, and forgive me if you've stated previously that you have, because you kind of alluded to it in parts, but I don't know if I picked up when you said, do you think you have PTSD? And what was that experience like, if you don't mind talking about it? And if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine too.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Damien. If I'm really honest, so you're right. We were sent down to retake arms here, and we were saying, look, you'll be there a day, take it, hold it, and there will be a larger force comes down to help you out. And that larger force never materialized, and we went into a 13-day battle, which was intensive to say the least. It was full on every single day for 13 days, and about 7 or 8 days in, we were down to just 3 British soldiers left there. All the rest had to be withdrawn, and we were left with a few Afghans, and we were holding on for grim death. And interestingly, while I was there, I met the most amazing Afghan major, a guy called Major Sherwali. And Major Sherwali fought for the Mujahideen against the Russians, and he was the most incredible man, and we struck up an immediate friendship. He didn't understand me or my religion or my background. I didn't understand him, his religion, his background. We didn't speak the same language. We talked through an interpreter, but became incredibly best friends. And he saved my life on a number of occasions. I mean, genuinely saved my life. He lay on top of me when a rocket-propelled grenade exploded above my head. He was just the most amazing man. And he died on the last day of the battle doing a task I asked him to do. And I was slightly injured, but he was killed. And he still remains the bravest, most noblest man that I have ever known. But some of the things we saw were literally horrific. I mean, they were horrific, and it is difficult to relay them. And when I came back after that tour of duty, I found life very difficult to deal with, and the nightmares, the night sweats, the the sights, the sounds, the smells that would trigger memories, and they still do now. I have to say, particularly smells, really did affect me. I suppose to get onto the leading point, do I have PTSD? I've got no idea, and I tell you why I have no idea, because where some people have comfort by being diagnosed and use it, I've got PTSD. That helps me understand why I feel the way I feel. For me personally, I've never wanted to be labeled, so I've never wanted to be allowed for somebody to say you have PTSD. I've always wanted to fight my demons in the way that I fight them, and fighting those demons goes from just being sad at times to quite anxious and depressed, and then going into to really difficult times and places where I have to deal with certain things. So I just deal with them, and I deal with that my own way. And I haven't been diagnosed with PTSD because I've got so many memories now. Holding a young 8-year-old dying girl called Shabia, who I couldn't help, the most beautiful young girl, with olive skin, lovely ruby lips and dark eyes and gorgeous shiny hair, and then just seeing the blood seep through her body through the puncture marks, and then not being able to help her and her life ebbing away. That stays with me. Her name stays with me. Her face has stayed with me. Or all of those other people that I lost. My medic who was blown up and was blown over the edge of a cliff, and whose body stuck to the side of the cliff and hung there like Velcro, until he died. And then I had to push him off to pick him up at the bottom, and having to do something like that is really quite traumatic. So all of these things all mesh into an awful time of my life within the military, fighting in an awful campaign. And it really was an awful campaign. And the biggest losers were civilians, I have to say. But I deal with my own mental traumas my way, and I don't want to be labeled as having PTSD. But I'm sure people want to label me and say, look, you've got mental health problems. But look, I talk about it. I don't lie about it. I'm very honest about it. And some of the things I did, I wish I never had to do. Some of the things I saw, I wish I didn't have to see. But that's what a soldier is, unfortunately. And that's just where I was.
Does the way you deal with the trauma of the past, does it always work for you? Or are there times when it doesn't?
No, it doesn't always work for me. It sometimes what works for me is going down a route where I think about doing the unthinkable, and then hopefully something else drags me out of that. And up until now, that's exactly what has happened. But people will know this. You don't have to be a soldier to suffer PTSD. You can have a traumatic birth, and it can cause PTSD in you. You can be part of a road traffic accident, and it can cause PTSD. There's many things that can cause PTSD, and mental health is one of those difficult things to really diagnose. So everything I talk about from my own particular perspective. And people talk about, loud bangs really make them jump, but it's not even loud bangs with me. It's not that at all. It's smells or sights or sounds or just a flashback memory or a key date in the diary where I suddenly go, goodness me, look at that. I've been struck by 3 suicide bombers, and if you're ever when a suicide bomb goes off, if you're ever there and see the aftermath of it, you suddenly realize just how brutal these things are, because invariably you're left with this mass sort of in the Afghan sun lying on the road, just going from pink to gray, and then you just look at it for a while and you go, what is that? And you suddenly realize it's the brain of the suicide bomber, which just pops out of the head and then just lands the mass on the floor, and then you watch it going from pink to gray. So that's a memory and a thought and a feeling. So whenever you're in Tesco's and you're in the supermarket and you're going along and you're looking at cuts of meat, well, when you see a body that's gone through a suicide bomb explosion, that's what it's like. Chunks of meat being cut off individuals, and that's what you have to deal with. So that's that sight that you see, and the smells. The smell of blood is very distinct. But when you're in a suicide bomb, you can nearly taste the coppery taste of blood on your tongue, which affects you as well. So it's those sights and sounds and smells which can trigger something. But you have to add that to where you are at this moment in time. If you're actually in a vulnerable position because something's happened, then when that comes up, you're less protected from it.
Fascinating.
That's all a bit gory, guys, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we thought Robbie Butler's stories about his butchering days were gory, but
Yeah. Well, listen. Apologies for if it is too gory, guys. I
no,
mean,
it's
No,
I'm just
it's
kind
fascinating.
of honestly
genuinely
being honest if
fascinating.
I can.
No,
No, absolutely fascinating, and yeah, we really appreciate you sharing that with us. And maybe not always the easiest to share, but yeah, we really appreciate it. No, definitely. Yeah, I suppose with the run up to the election, and you know, they talk about victims and stuff in the manifestos, and you having an acute awareness of what trauma is and how it can affect people. Have you found that's been an asset for you in terms of being able to relate to people who have experienced trauma through the troubles?
I don't, and I tell you why I don't, Damien, because this is really important. Everybody's experience is different. You know, so for me to say I know what you're going through because I've went through it, that's not right. It's not fair because everybody's is absolutely individual. It's very unique. It's very different, and it's brought on from various different things. Some people are traumatized because they had no justice. Some people are traumatized because they hear the story about how their loved one ended, or some people are traumatized because they are a victim of it themselves and they still carry the scars, and they will all have different thoughts about this. So for me to say, oh, I've lived through this, I know what you're going through, would be unfair because everyone is very different. But what I think is really important is that there's empathy and there's compassion, and we listen to people's stories. The one thing we have to do with victims is talk to them less and listen to them more. You know, they have to tell us their stories. They have to tell us how they're feeling, and we need to show empathy and compassion, regardless of who they are. If that's a victim of what a British soldier did, or if that's a victim of what a terrorist did, it doesn't matter. They are still victims and they are still survivors, and they need to be treated as such. And of course, we're not just talking about physical victims. We're talking about those with mental health issues because of it. We're talking about those who may have suffered rape as a weapon of war. All of these things, you know, we need to listen to them when they're ready to talk, and then make sure that we can help them with empathy and compassion.
so I mean, it's a fascinating insight. You know, it's something that's obviously it's a perspective that we haven't got so far from any of the guests we've been talking to. You know, I think we listened to Naomi Long talk about the Finnish prison service for about half an hour. I mean, that was a lot more. This is a lot more interesting.
Well,
I
well,
thought
well,
as
well
Naomi.
yeah. And I guess, Kieran, what I'm doing to speaking to you here is maybe just giving you real life perspectives. You know, and if I want to delve into a manifesto, it clearly can, and it's very clean, it's very clinical, and it gives you very sharp answers, I suppose. But there's a reality to all of this that we need to make sure that we bring into everything that we talk about, and that is the one common denominator with everything we talk about is people, is people. And people are real. They're not strap lines. They're not manifesto promises. They're real people, and that's what we always have to remember when we're doing anything.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I tried to say to Damien is, and we've made this mistake before, you know, or we haven't made the mistake, but we've had guests on, and obviously they're dying to talk about um, alliance policies or SDLP policies. And says, Damien, this is quite boring. If someone wanted to find out these, you know, all they have to do is turn on the TV or, you know, look at the leaflet that drops through their door. You know, we're not going to find anything particularly interesting or nothing new is going to be discovered in this. Like, so I thought better to go with the person rather than the policies or the politics, you know, because that's where the interest, I think, listeners is going to lie.
And that's a good point because it shows you what a motivation in a person is when they're doing something. So I'm a leader of a political party, but as a leader of a political party, what is my motivations and where does it come from? And I think that's where the interesting thing comes from is where does your motivations come from? So as a young man, I left school at the age of 16 with no educational qualifications. I still have none whatsoever, not a single O level, GCSE, A level, never went to university, got absolutely nothing. And I still have nothing. But I've learned an awful lot from all of the things that I've done around the world. First of all, as a soldier, because I saw what war is like. We talked about it in Afghanistan. That's what real war is like. I've seen what division is like. I've seen it in Bosnia. I know what division is all about. I was there. I was there when the Stary Most Bridge was reopened in Mostar. having been destroyed during the Bosnian conflict, and I was there to watch it being reopened again. And I've seen hunger because I've been in various places in Africa, in Uganda, in Somalia. People don't see what's going on. I remember going for a run in Uganda, just from the tented camp I was staying in when I was in Uganda, and I went for a run, and all of the schoolboys and girls were walking up this dusty lane to head to school in their pristine white shirts. I never know how they managed to do it, in their pristine white shirts and ties. So, amazing. And as I was running along, there at the side of the road was a beheaded body. And it took me aback, but the kids never flinched a single eye. They just looked at it and walked on, never thought a single thing. And there was me just running past this beheaded body at the side of the road these kids were using. So, but in Africa, I've seen real hunger. I mean, really people starving. So whenever I come to Northern Ireland and I see conflict, or I see division, and I see hunger, I see it as something that's not a strap line, it's a lived experience, but it can be dealt with if politicians really do motivate themselves to deal with it. It's not as bad as other places in the world. It's an issue, but we can fix it, and we need to fix it.
It's interesting. There seems to be a bit of a culture war at the minute with trans rights, and there seems to be is a trans woman a woman? And then the answer is either, well, no, a biological woman is a woman, or no, a trans woman is a woman. And it's the idea being that you've got one camp where women maybe are uncomfortable with the idea, certain women, I should say, not all women, certain women are uncomfortable with the idea that being a trans, big biologically born male and transitioning to a female somehow denigrates their femaleness, if you like. And then you've got the other camp that says, no, absolutely, if you're born a man but transition to a woman, you're always a woman, and that's just the way it is. And then you've got the added complexity of, well, if you are going to make that change, do you do it in childhood? Because that can have the greatest impact in terms of over time, rightly or wrongly, and good or bad, depending on what way what sort of school of thought you prescribe to. I'm not going to ask you, is a trans woman a woman, because I think it's an unhelpful question, and I don't think it's necessarily nice for trans people to have their existence debated by other people necessarily. But how have you evolved in that subject, or have you engaged with trans people, or how did you kind of?
I have engaged with trans people, and I've engaged with those women who have the fears about their identity, and safe spaces as well. So I've engaged with them all to understand them better. It's far more complex than people realize. We are a trans friendly party without a shadow of a doubt. If a trans woman came up to me, then I would treat her with the most respect, and I would call her whatever name she wanted to be called, and I would treat her as a trans woman. But that doesn't take away the issue that we have about safe spaces, because if women are concerned about safe spaces, toileting or changing, then that's an issue we have to deal with. We have to deal with it. We can't argue, and we can have to. It's not my lived experience, so I need to listen to these people and find out what's going on with them. And it's the same with elite sports, or sports in general. When you look at sports, and people say, well, you can't be a trans woman and play in women's sports, but in some cases you can, in some cases you can't. You certainly couldn't in boxing. You shouldn't in rugby. You shouldn't in physical sports like that. But you can do in bowling. You could do in archery. You could do in other things where physicality isn't as important. So that's another conversation that has to be had. That to me is the important thing here, is to make sure that we show respect to everybody and understand the very real issues that they have. And women do have real issues about changing facilities and safe spaces, and trans people are some of the most bullied that we have within the LGBT community, and we need to look after them as well. So we can do all of this by having conversations and treating everybody with the respect they deserve. I hope that answers it, but it's complex, and I wouldn't want to just make it sound like a very easy thing to do.
No,
I think your I think your answer was more succinct than Damien's question. No, very good. was going to say there's some questions that we ask all our guests. Doug, just was it some quick fire ones? So just trying to remember the quick fire round that we've asked everyone, Damien. I think the first couple we asked was favorite holiday destination in Ireland, north, south, anywhere on the island.
Oh, okay. Right. So I know it's quick fire, but I might have to take a bit of time to reflect.
That doesn't matter.
That's I guess the north coast of Northern Ireland I really like. I also like Sligo as well, and I like the coast off Donegal. So I think Ireland, the whole island of Ireland is a magical place, north and south. Northern Ireland and Ireland. So anywhere you go, I think you get something very different, and I genuinely like it. Going further afield, I really like Italy. So I like to spend a bit of time in Italy. But if I tell you the most beautiful country that I've ever been to, it would be there would be two. One would be Bosnia. Bosnia is an incredibly beautiful country, racked with war, but it is gorgeous. The second one is Croatia, and along the Dalmatian coast, along Split or Makarska or Dubrovnik, which I really like.
Nice.
That wasn't
nice
a quick
choice.
fire answer,
but Bosnia was not one I was expecting you to say.
yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, the next one was, what's your favorite overseas one?
Well, I answered
so
you.
that's great. Yeah, no, that's no one said Bosnia yet. Croatia's became popular with people, but
Well,
not
I tell you why
Bosnia.
Bosnia. I tell you what people don't even realize about Bosnia. Bosnia has got probably the smallest coastline. People don't even realize Bosnia's got a coastline. It's got
I
a
think I
coastline
recall that
which
from
is
the map.
it's about 400 meters long, but it's got a fantastic beach there as well. But I tell you what's really lovely about Bosnia, and maybe it's because I viewed it a lot of times from a helicopter. It's turquoise rivers. These rivers are absolutely stunning. I mean, it really is a lovely place.
Oh wow!
Don't let Edwin Pitts near them rivers.
And Mostar, of course, Mostar is great, and their wine is lovely too.
Nice. What's the next one? Voting for 16-year-olds, yes or no?
Yes, we have to do one of two things. We either have to balance up how we do things here in Northern Ireland, or we need to make sure that 16-year-olds get a vote. Because if 16-year-olds can go to work, if they can pay their national insurance and pay tax at work, then they need to be able to have a vote. Or if they can get married and they can, with permission from parents, then they should have a vote. You either do that, or you change the balance of how we do things in Northern Ireland, and that's not going to change. So I think 16-year-olds should have a vote.
Nice. And favorite thing that you've been watching on TV, on Netflix or other recently?
Okay, so I'm late to this, I have to say. So when people say this, they'll say, "God,
have you been using Robbie Butler's password for Netflix?"
But so I'm late to this. So I've only just started watching it, but anybody else will say you're behind, and I don't want anybody telling me what happens. But I've started watching Peaky Blinders.
Oh, nice.
I haven't watched that at all.
And I'm in series 3. So I don't need anybody telling me what happens. But I know I'm late on the curve on this one, but it's really good.
Jeez, Doug, we'll almost need to mute that last answer just at the point where you say the TV show, because on Twitter someone's going to come along back,
That's a good point, actually. Yeah. So what else is there? There must be something else I can say then, and we can change it.
Well, you would really enjoy Homeland, although I'm sure you've watched it before.
I watched the first series and then lost interest.
God, I thought it was great. A great show.
Yeah.
Well, the first 3 or 4, and then they go on foreign deployments to Pakistan. No, it was great. I thought that would be definitely your scene.
You didn't see Sopranos, Doug?
No, I never watched it. Never watched it.
It's to me it's the greatest ever. Yeah, it's
well, maybe I'll get around to watching it, but I'm always slightly behind the curve on everybody else. They're talking about it, and then I suddenly get into it.
I've been dying to ask this, and it just popped into my head. So sorry, I know this is kind of different from the questions that were asked. Doug, see when you saw the whole thing with, obviously with the whole thing. That's a terrible way to describe it, the whole with the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. Did you get itchy feet when you were seeing people kind of saying, right, I'm going to go over and I'm actually going to fight for Ukraine? Was there that soldier element of you thinking, jeepers?
You're looking at me. You're looking at me down the line here on Zoom, and you can see that I've got glasses. What you can't see is my waistline is probably a lot bigger than what it used to be when I was a younger fighting man, and my knees and hearing are not the best. I'm not sure I would be good in a scrap in Ukraine. However, the itchy feet that you talk of is not an itchy feet that I want to go and do that, but it's an itchy feet that I want to do something to help those poor people. So I have itchy feet and a sense of guilt that we can't escalate this conflict. I know we can't escalate this conflict, but I so want to help these people.
Like, out of curiosity, how do you think it's going to play out? Sorry, last question, because I know we're like, I'm sure you're dying to just stare off into space and just relax after a long day. But yeah, how do you think that's going to play out?
I think it's going to be a long war. I think Russia is desperate to get some sort of a win so they can stop. Ukraine are defending extremely well. I think the news about Finland wanting to join NATO is going to really change things. I mean, we are a day away, a week away, a month away, a year away from the whole of Europe being ignited in conflict. And it has an effect on us. Northern Ireland cannot sit in splendid isolation here. It has an effect on us. 4 million was the last count. 4 million refugees have left Ukraine, have gone into the EU single market countries. That affects us. They're going into Ireland. From Ireland, they're coming across into Northern Ireland, and we need to be able to help them. We need to be in a position to help them. We can't just say it's over there, it doesn't affect us. It absolutely affects us, and therefore I'm worried that Finland joining NATO, Russia may react by taking a few kilometers of Finnish ground with forces and just sitting there to keep it destabilized, and so that NATO can't expand.
Yeah, Russia's been very well. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but the headlines would seem to suggest that the Russian military is pretty poor. They have this impression that they're a big military force, but then in the reality is that they're logistically they're terrible. They run out of fuel. They don't have parts to repair their vehicles. The communication lines are horrendous.
Yeah, and look, I think the Russian military thought it was going to be something it wasn't. 3 days roll into Kyiv and have a popular uprising, and that's it done. I don't think they've seen the level of resistance that they're getting from Ukraine. But remember, British forces were in Ukraine from 2014, training Ukrainians to fight in defensive conflicts. And even one of my colleagues, Rand McCready, spent a year there, training the Ukrainian army, and we're supplying them with weaponry which is incredibly sophisticated. A lot of it is built here it's built in Belfast. So I think they've got the tools to defend. I think eventually Russia will take a huge swathe of Ukraine, the Luhansk and Donetsk region. The whole Donbass will probably fall to Russia, and then they will stop. And then what do we do? That's the problem, because we did nothing when they took the Crimea, and if they did the same with Luhansk and Donetsk, what do we do then? We're in a difficult place, but it could go bad, and it could go bad very, very quickly.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for your time. It's been really fascinating. So sometimes on these podcasts, we might say it's been really interesting when we might be telling porkies, but this has genuinely been really, really interesting. So thank you very much for being so generous with your time.
Absolutely, guys. And can I just say, I've enjoyed talking to you because it's been easy talking to you, and maybe I was a little bit rambly, and I apologize if I was a little bit rambly, but I was trying to be very personal in what I was talking about, as opposed to being very clinically politician stylish. So I hope you managed to get something out of it.
No, definitely. That's exactly what we were after. It really was fascinating.
Well,
Yeah.
listen, good to talk
Thank
to
you
you,
so
chap.
much, Doug. And look, honestly, best of luck for the election. Yeah, we hope you guys get a really good turnout. So, how many
You're good,
days?
guys.
How many days
All
was
the
it?
best.
6 days or 7
7.
days, whatever it is.
This day next week, it'll be all over in 90 minutes.
Let's hope it's all done and dusted and finished and gone. See you later, guys. All the best to you.
Cheers,
Take care.
Doug.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.